If I told you that one of the first to be eliminated from the 2026 World Cup is not a player, not a coach, not even a national team, but rather a FIFA referee, sounds like a joke, but that's the truth. Just a few days before the opening day, the best referee in Africa was denied entry into the United States. At the same time, many fans from other countries are struggling with visas. Some people lost thousands of dollars due to their travel plans falling through. Some others don't even know if they will be allowed into the stadium to watch their home team play. But that's just the beginning, because on the other side of the tournament, a ticket to the final is being sold for nearly $690,000. Just think about it. One side is made up of those who cannot cross the border. On one side are those who must be unimaginably wealthy to step onto the field. And in the middle is the World Cup. The event was created to connect the world. So why is the biggest World Cup in history creating a sense of division rather than unity? Today we will investigate why more and more people are calling the 2026 World Cup the World Cup of Chaos, and whether the US is becoming the most controversial host in the tournament's history. Let's get started. If you want to understand why more and more people are calling the 2026 World Cup the World Cup of Chaos, then perhaps we should start from a very strange place. Not the stadium, not the locker room, not the final training sessions of the teams, but rather the immigration checkpoint. Usually before a World Cup, the biggest stories will be about which team is the strongest, which star player is in top form, or who has the best chance of lifting the trophy. But this time, one of the most attention-grabbing headlines revolves around a referee. Omar Abdulkadir Artan, who was voted the best male referee in Africa in 2025, was selected to officiate the World Cup. However, in the end, he could not participate after being denied entry into the United States due to issues related to the vetting process. Just that detail alone creates a rather strange image, a person chosen by FIFA for the World Cup, but unable to step through the door to the World Cup. And this is the point that makes many people start to question. If even an officially appointed referee is having difficulties, then what awaits the ordinary fans? That question becomes even more significant as a series of other stories emerge. Some Scottish fans reported that their travel permits were cancelled close to the departure date, causing them to lose thousands of dollars on pre-booked flights and hotels. Meanwhile, reports of entry restrictions for citizens from several other countries continue to spark debate. The point of interest here is not which country is right or wrong. What makes many people feel uneasy is the sense of uncertainty. When buying World Cup tickets, people often worry about whether their home team will win. This year, some people have to worry about whether they will be allowed to go to the stadium or not. And this is the first twist in the story. In nearly 100 years of World Cup history, the biggest challenge has often been on the field. But this time, for quite a few people, the first challenge lies at the passport control counter. It sounds funny, but it's also quite awkward. You can prepare flags, jerseys, plane tickets, and hotels months in advance. However, the first match you have to pass is not the World Cup group stage, but the paperwork check. If you find this topic interesting, take a second to hit like and subscribe, because what we just talked about is just the tip of the iceberg, because right after the immigration issue, an even more controversial question is emerging. The World Cup was originally created to connect the world. But what happens when thousands of fans feel they are excluded from the festival from the very beginning? And that's where the story becomes even more surprising, because in the next part, we will talk about those who were not eliminated by the match results, not eliminated by the opposing team, but eliminated from the World Cup even before the first ball was kicked. Try to imagine this. You've been waiting for the World Cup for 4 years. You stayed up late watching the qualifiers. You bought a new jersey. You save money every month. When the national team officially secures a ticket to the World Cup, you immediately start planning for a trip that might only happen once in a lifetime. Then one day you realize that the biggest issue is not the ticket price, not the hotel, not a flight, but rather you might not be able to go. That is the feeling that many fans in some countries are facing ahead of the 2026 World Cup. And this is what makes the story particularly sensitive, because the World Cup has never been just about football. For millions of people, it is family memories, national pride, a rare opportunity to stand amidst a sea of people and sing the national anthem with strangers who share the same colors. However, this time, there are people who don't even know if they will have the chance to appear in that sea of people. For Iranian fans, disputes over visas, additional security measures, and ticket-related changes have created an atmosphere of uncertainty. Many had made plans months in advance, but as the opening day approached, they became increasingly uncertain whether that dream would come true. That was quite a strange turnaround. In football, people are used to being eliminated after 90 minutes of play. This time, some people felt they were eliminated even before the match started, and Iran is not the only case mentioned in the discussions. Similar stories have emerged around fans from Haiti, Senegal, or Ivory Coast. Not everyone is being stopped, not everyone has issues, but just the feeling of having to worry about whether one is allowed to participate is enough to change the World Cup experience. Think about that for a moment. A fan in New York might only need to drive a few hours to get to the stadium, while a fan in Dhaka or Abiyan might have to navigate through multiple layers of procedures before even thinking about stepping onto a plane. The same World Cup, but two completely different realities. And this is perhaps the point that makes many people feel the most uneasy. The World Cup was originally built on a very simple idea, bringing the world to one place. But this time, getting to that place has become a controversial story. If you also feel this is a perspective that is rarely mentioned, please hit like to help the video reach more people. And don't forget to subscribe, because what we are about to discuss will be even more controversial, because until now we have only been talking about those who cannot enter the festival. But the next surprise is that even those who can enter the stadium are facing another question, a question that leaves many fans stunned. Will the 2026 World Cup still be for ordinary fans? Because when we look at the ticket prices, everything starts to become much more unbelievable. And then we come to the part that perhaps astonished many people the most in the entire story. Let's temporarily forget about the visa. Let's temporarily forget about immigration. Suppose you have passed all the procedures. Valid passport. The flight ticket has been booked. The hotel has been paid for. Finally, you are standing at the door of the World Cup. But at that moment, a new question arose. Do you have enough money to get inside? The World Cup was once called the Fans Festival. But when looking at the ticket prices for the 20,126 World Cup, many people are starting to wonder if that definition still holds true. This is the first piece of data that made many people stop and think. At one point before the tournament, the cheapest tickets for the final were listed at around $8,625. Some wheelchair-accessible seats are priced over $10,000. And most notably, a seat near the corner flag area once appeared with a price of around $690,000. That's right, nearly $700,000, a figure enough to buy a house in many areas of the United States. Hearing this, many people might laugh, thinking it must be a technical error. But no, that was the price that once appeared on the ticketing system. And here's the interesting part. In football, we often debate which player is worth $100 million. Now, perhaps we should start debating how much a plastic seat in the stands is worth. That is an image that is both humorous and thought-provoking, because the World Cup is built on emotions. A worker, a teacher, a truck driver, or an office employee can all save money for many years to fulfill the dream of watching the national team play. But when ticket prices soared to unimaginable levels, the story began to change. Fans no longer ask, does my team have a chance to win the championship? They are starting to ask, do I have a chance to get on the field? And this is the second turnaround. The biggest worry is no longer on the scoreboard, but in the bank account. Everything became even more controversial when FIFA implemented a dynamic pricing model, meaning ticket prices change according to market demand. That means two people buying the same type of ticket at two different times could pay two completely different prices. Not to mention that FIFA also operates its own ticket resale platform and collects a portion of the fees from those transactions. Of course, from a business perspective, this can be seen as a market mechanism, but from the fans' perspective, the feeling is very different, because the biggest festival on the planet is starting to resemble an auction more than a sporting event. If you find any price reasonable for a World Cup final, please share it in the comments. I'm really curious to know the number that people find acceptable. And if this data surprises you, because the next part goes beyond just ticket prices, because the bigger question is not just who can afford to enter the stadium. The bigger question is, why has the World Cup expanded like never before in history, from 32 teams to 48 teams, from 64 matches to 104 matches? Is this to serve football or to serve some other purpose? And this is when the story starts to get more interesting, because the issue may no longer be simply the high ticket prices. High prices are just a symptom. The bigger question is, what is the 2026 World Cup selling football? Or are they selling the right to access football? It sounds like a philosophical riddle, but look at what is happening. For decades, the World Cup has been built on a very simple promise. Whether you are a teacher, a worker, a truck driver, or an office employee, you still have the chance to be part of the biggest sporting event on the planet. Not easy, but possible. Nowadays, that feeling is changing. One of the biggest controversies revolves around the mechanism known as dynamic pricing. Simply put, ticket prices are not fixed, but change continuously according to market demand. From a business perspective, this is completely reasonable. Airlines do that, hotels do that, big concerts do the same. But when the World Cup adopted this model, a paradox emerged. Two people buy the same type of ticket in the same seating area, but can pay two completely different prices just because they click the purchase button at different times. That was the first shock. The second shock is even more controversial. Some ticket buyers reported that they selected a specific seating category, but later received positions that did not match their initial expectations. Although each case has different circumstances, these complaints have contributed to a wave of skepticism about the transparency of the ticketing system. And when the skepticism arose, regulatory agencies began to take notice. Consumer protection organizations in Europe have filed complaints. Meanwhile, officials in New York and New Jersey are also reviewing issues related to ticket sales operations. The mere fact that a sporting event is facing such investigations is already a noteworthy signal. This is the truly noteworthy point of the story. The World Cup used to be an event where fans felt they were at the center. Now, sometimes fans feel more like customers in an auction market. The difference may seem small, but emotionally it's very significant, because football is not like buying stocks or booking a hotel room. People don't buy a World Cup ticket just for its utility value. People buy memories, buy emotions, buy the opportunity to tell your grandchildren, "Back then, I was there." And when those emotions start to be valued by algorithms, many people feel that something is changing. If you agree or disagree with this, please leave a comment below. I really want to know people's opinions. Should the World Cup operate like a modern business, or should it retain some spirit for traditional fans? But wait, the debates about tickets and money are not what worries many experts the most. Because in the next part, we will talk about a decision that could completely change the face of the World Cup from 32 teams to 48 teams, from 64 matches to 104 matches. And the question then will be, is FIFA expanding opportunities for football or expanding something else? And this is perhaps the biggest debate of the 20,126 World Cup. Not about the USA, not about the visa. It's not about the ticket price either, but about the tournament itself. For the first time in history, the World Cup expanded from 32 to 48 teams. The number of matches increased from 64 to 104. A new round has been added. More countries are given the opportunity to appear on the biggest stage of world football. At first glance, it sounds wonderful. Who would oppose having more countries participate in the World Cup? If you are a fan in Morocco, Iraq, Uzbekistan, or a country that has never regularly participated in the World Cup, this could be the best news in decades. The dream that once seemed too distant has suddenly become more realistic. And that is the strongest argument of the supporters. They argue that football is a global sport. If the World Cup truly belongs to the world, why is most of the world left out? That is a very hard question to refute. But then another question arises. If more is always better, why not raise it to 64 teams or 80 teams? Clearly, there must still be a limit somewhere. When it increased to 48 teams, it wasn't just the number of teams that increased. The entire tournament structure has changed. Now, not only the top 2 teams from each group have the chance to advance, many third-place teams will also advance past the group stage. In other words, surviving the early stages of the World Cup has become easier than before. Some experts are concerned that this could reduce the intensity that is part of the tournament's appeal. Because remember, part of the beauty of the World Cup lies in the fact that there are no second chances. A small mistake can also make a big team pack their bags and go home. But when the door is opened wider, does that tension remain intact? This is where the debate becomes more interesting. Some observers do not view the story from a professional perspective. They view it from the political perspective of football. The smaller football federations are the biggest beneficiaries of the World Cup expansion. And it is also the smaller federations that hold the majority of votes in FIFA's governance system. That leads to a question that many do not hesitate to ask. Does the expansion expansion of the World Cup stem entirely from the desire to develop football, or does it also serve other goals within the global football ecosystem? No one has an absolute answer. But it is clear that this debate will continue for a long time, because on one side is the dream of countries stepping into the limelight for the first time. On the other hand, there is the concern that the World Cup might be sacrificing quality for scale. So, in your opinion, if given the choice, would you prefer a 32-team World Cup or a 48-team one? Please share in the comments. I really want to know which side of this debate everyone is on. And if you think this is the biggest controversy of the 2026 World Cup, just wait a moment, because in the next part, we will talk about an even greater paradox. A tournament that continuously talks about sustainability, a green future, environmental responsibility, but can generate one of the largest emissions in World Cup history. And that's when the story goes beyond football. It begins to touch on how we organize global events in the 21st century. And from here, the story begins to extend beyond the confines of the stadium, admission tickets or visa disputes. Because a bigger question is emerging. If the 2026 World Cup is promoted as the most modern, advanced, and largest in history, what is the true cost of that largest? According to many studies cited in recent debates, the 2026 World Cup could generate over 9 million tons of CO2. Just that number alone is enough to make many people gasp. To put it into perspective, this is the amount of emissions equivalent to the annual activities of some small countries around the world. And the reason is quite simple: distance. This World Cup spans 3 countries and dozens of cities. A team might play their first match on the west coast of the United States, then have to travel thousands of kilometers for the next match. Fans also face a similar dilemma. If they want to follow their favorite team, they not only need money to buy tickets, but also have to prepare for a journey like an intercontinental trip. In World Cup history, watching a match has never been associated with so many flights. In the past, a fan could stay in one city or region for most of the tournament. In 2026, many people may have to continuously move between states, even between countries, just to keep up with the match schedule. It is worth pondering that FIFA has emphasized commitments to sustainable development and reducing environmental impact for many years. But the paradox lies in the fact that the more you try to scale up, the more the tournament seems to require travel activities. It's like saying you want to save fuel, then deciding to buy a car that's twice as big. Not entirely unreasonable, but it will definitely raise questions for many people. And the story doesn't stop there. Even after arriving in the host city, local transportation costs became a topic of debate. The train fares to some stadiums have been reported to be much higher than usual. The price of shuttle buses has increased significantly. Parking costs at many locations range from about $75 to $300, depending on the game. At first glance, they seem like just small search charges. But adding it all up, fans are starting to realize a reality. Sometimes the ticket to the game is no longer the most expensive part of the trip. The journey to that seat is the most expensive part. If you're still following along, let me know in the comments. In your opinion, should global sporting events prioritize scale or the convenience and accessibility for fans? I'm very curious about everyone's opinions. And if these numbers surprise you, please hit like and subscribe, because the next part is where all the pieces start to come together. Because after the visa, after the ticket prices, after the flight spanning thousands of kilometers, we will have to face the most important question of the entire video: is the real issue of the 2026 World Cup about football? Or is it about who gets to participate in the biggest festival on the planet? When we start this video, we talk about visas, then there are the ticket prices, then there are the debates about expanding the tournament and its environmental impact. At first glance, these seem to be completely different issues. But if you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, you'll realize they revolve around the same question. A simple yet powerful question: who is allowed to participate in this festival? After all, the World Cup has never been just about football. If it were just football, we could sit at home and watch it on TV. What makes the World Cup a special event is the feeling of belonging to something greater than oneself. A mechanic in Texas, a teacher in Cairo, a bus driver in Glasgow, or a student in Casablanca can all sing, cry, and hope for the same thing together. That is the true magic of the World Cup. But this is the wow factor that makes many people think. When looking at the controversies of 2026, many people no longer ask which team is the strongest. They started asking who can get here, who has the appropriate passport, who has enough money to buy a ticket, who can afford long flights and expensive hotels, who can overcome all the logistical barriers before thinking about football. That is a very notable change. In the past, the greatest distance between fans and the World Cup was thousands of kilometers. Nowadays, sometimes that distance lies in bank accounts or on administrative paperwork. And perhaps that is why this debate resonates with more people than FIFA or any host country could have predicted, because it reflects a familiar feeling in modern society. The feeling that more and more amazing experiences in the world still exist, but not everyone has equal access to them. If you're following along, please share your thoughts in the comments. In your opinion, is the World Cup today still a festival for everyone, or is it gradually becoming an experience for those who are more privileged? And in the final part, we will arrive at the biggest question of the entire video. Perhaps the real issue is not whether the US is the worst host in history, but whether the modern World Cup is gradually becoming something very different from the dream that billions once cherished. And perhaps this is the moment we return to the question that appeared at the beginning of the video. Is the US the worst host country in World Cup history? To be honest, it might be too early to answer, because when this video was made, most of the matches had not yet taken place. We don't know if the stadiums will create legendary moments. We don't know if a small team will write a fairy tale that moves the whole world. We don't yet know whether the 2026 World Cup will ultimately be remembered for its controversies or for its goals. And that's what makes it interesting. History is often very strange. Sometimes events that were harshly criticized before they began become beautiful memories. But sometimes the initial warnings reflect a larger change happening behind the scenes. Perhaps the real issue doesn't lie with the United States. It's not with FIFA either. But it lies in a deeper question. What is the modern World Cup becoming? Because when we look at the big picture, we see higher entry barriers, more expensive tickets, longer journeys, greater costs, and increasingly more debates. The World Cup used to be a place where a worker, a truck driver, a teacher, or an ordinary family could dream of becoming part of the biggest festival on the planet. Nowadays, that dream is still there. But for some people, it seems to be getting further away. And perhaps that is the biggest debate of the 2026 World Cup. It's not about who will be the champion, not Messi or Mbappe, but whether the biggest football festival in the world still belongs to everyone. Perhaps many years later, when looking back at the 2026 World Cup, people will not remember the controversies over visas or ticket prices. Or perhaps those very controversies will be seen as the first signs of a new era in global sports. We don't know yet, but that's what makes this story worth pondering. What about you? In your opinion, is the 2026 World Cup being judged too harshly, or are the current concerns completely justified? And is the World Cup today still an event for everyone, or is it gradually becoming an experience for the few? Please share your opinion in the comments section. I read almost all the comments and would love to know your perspective. If you enjoy in-depth videos analyzing the economy, society, and the changes shaping America and the world, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. This video is made for the purpose of commenting, analyzing, and discussing publicly available information related to the 2026 World Cup. The content is not intended to attack any individual, organization, or country. The statements in the video reflect the perspectives, data, and debates currently appearing in the media at the time of production. Viewers are encouraged to consult various sources of information to gain a more comprehensive perspective on this topic. Thank you for taking the time to watch. See you in the next